So thank you, everyone. And as explained there, I thought some of you might not know who Equinor is. And kind of as mentioned, we are Equinor, formerly Statoil. We changed our name on May 2018, when our shareholders voted for the change in name to move us away from being just an oil and gas company, but actually being a broader energy provider. And it reflects where we see the future going and how we want to be part of this transition to the new future of energy, by being able to provide holistic energy solutions in those countries where we have operations. And then many of you know Statoil. We used to be petrol stations, and I'm sure many of you bought those sneaky packets of Tato's and chocolate bars while you were at the petrol pump, and discarding of the rubbish before you made it home. We've been in Ireland for 20 years, involved in various elements of the energy supply chain. And now we're very interested in looking at how we can be part of the renewable side of the supply chain within Ireland. And so why renewables? Why has an oil and gas company decided to look at renewables? The global energy market is changing, and the renewable industry is changing fast. Costs are decreasing, and competition for the most attractive wind and solar projects is fierce, as has already been presented. Improvements in technology and increasing deployment has driven this development, and turning wind and solar into very competitive alternative options to conventional renewable sources. And it's expected that renewables will account for an even more significant portion of the energy mix over the next 20 years, especially in the countries like Europe and the US. And it's our ambition to grow profitably within this space and building out our already existing portfolio in renewables, and expanding into other areas of the renewables outside offshore wind. We're exploring the potential in solar, in the solar value chain, in geothermal power, in energy storage, and looking for new opportunities to deliver attractive returns in innovation and venturing activities. And in the longer term, we're also looking at other areas of development like the hydrogen value chain, CO2 utilization, technologies, and other spaces. And just to reiterate how we remain very committed to the renewable and low carbon space. In 2017, 2 years ahead of a target that we had set, as a company, we achieved a target that was set to reduce our annual CO2 emissions from the NCS, the Norwegian Continental Shelf. We also set a target that by 2020, 25% of our R&D budget would be directed towards low carbon and renewable solutions, and that by 2030, 15 to 20% of our CapEx would be directed to renewables projects. But let's talk specifically about offshore wind. And what do we do in offshore wind? We're one of the largest offshore wind developers in the world, and it was a natural step for us to take moving on from our oil and gas portfolio, given that we are the largest oil and gas offshore producer in the world. And we considered a natural fit with our already existing kind of engineering and technologies as in our DNA. So at the moment, we currently have an offshore wind portfolio that powers about 1 million homes in the UK and Germany, and is representative of about over 1 gigawatt worth of power. And then we have a portfolio, the likes of Dogger Bank, New York Empire Wind, and also projects in Poland, which have the potential to power over 5 million homes. Dogger Bank alone is a 3.5 gigawatt project that can power just a bit shy of 10% of the UK. And then we have Hywind Scotland. Hywind Scotland is the world's first floating wind farm, which became operational in September 2017 and is a 30 megawatt park. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But we're also looking at seeing how we can roll out these floating solutions and be able to avail even more of our oceans that are there. And so I mentioned Hywind. What is it? Hywind is a conventional technology used in a new way. It's a turbine placed in a floating structure using a spar. So we've taken our oil and gas expertise and put a turbine on top of it. Super simple solution. It's a simple substructure. It's made of steel and enables kind of rapid production and mass production of that. It can be assembled onshore, which reduces the risks and costs of offshore assembly. And it's attached to the seafloors using suction anchors, which again enables it to be able to survive in very harsh conditions. And despite that simple design, there's a lot of technology that's actually going into the back of it and what we call the brains of our turbines. We have a controller that actually controls the blade pitch in order to reduce the motion, and we find that our floating turbines move less than bottom-fixed offshore turbines at the moment. Hywind Demo, which is off the coast of Norway, so similar conditions to what you would see off the west coast of Ireland, has produced more than 40 gigawatt hours since it was started up, And it's experienced wind speeds of 40 meters per second and maximum wave heights of 19 meters per second. And the only thing that happened during that was a little red light halfway up stopped working. So you can see that these are very durable, robust, and can deal with very, very harsh conditions. And if you ask Siemens, what's their best performing turbine? It's Hywind off the west coast of Norway. It's their best producing turbine that they have offshore anywhere in the world. And Hywind Scotland. Hywind Scotland is the first floating wind farm, and it consists of 5 6-megawatt turbines, producing 30 megawatts and powering about 20,000 homes. It's off the east coast of Scotland. It started producing in September 2017. It's in 25 kilometers offshore, water depths of 100 meters. And to give you a sense of the scale of these turbines, they're 6 megawatts. It's 2.5 times Big Ben. It's a pretty large scale. And right now, we kind of see 6 megawatts as a small turbine in the options that we're looking at today. That project cost us about 2 billion NOK to develop. And as we say, it's a fairly small project as well at just 30 megawatts. But it's an excellent example of how we've been able to go and use the different technologies to avail of new markets and new areas within our oceans. And so why has this happened? And it has been mentioned a little bit. It's about the cost developments that have happened in floating. And one of the main challenges for floating offshore wind is costs. And towards 2030, we see that what really has to happen for floating is it needs to become as competitive as the bottom fixed or even more competitive. And we believe that as a company, given the fact that we have the only park in the world that has multiple floating turbines in one location, that we're in one of the best positions to be able to estimate where the cost reductions can really go. And if we look at Hywind to Hywind Scotland, we saw 60 to 70% cost reductions from one project to the next. And we believe that if we actually scale up outside of a demo park, we'll be able to see a further 50% in cost reductions. And that's primarily going to be due to an increase in scale, optimizing processes, further mobilization of supply chain, improved installation, many of just the general maturities that will happen in the industry. And we believe that we can reach 40 to 60 megawatt hours in euros by 2030 through the ability to be able to achieve those economies of scale, and also by being able to piggyback on some of the developments that happened in bottom fixed. Perfect. But to reach those competitive levels, we need several project iterations are needed. We also need the development of a supply chain, a further development of a supply chain, and we also need the regulatory support to be in place to be able to build these type of projects. To give you something else what we're doing, and this is, it's again saying another world first, but Batwind. And Batwind is combining a 1 megawatt lithium-ion battery onshore at our substations to Hywind Scotland. And the purpose of doing this is to be able to combine offshore wind and storage, which hasn't been done before. Benefits of that is that you get to capture any wind overshots. You get to reduce balancing costs. You can increase the power market value. For the likes of EirGrid, it helps to ensure that they have more consistency and surety in the amount of power they're going to be getting. And so we're looking at seeing how else can we go and combine storage into our other operations. And one thing I should mention, which I didn't say about Hywind Scotland, as I say, we've been operating since September 2017. That project, the capacity factors that we've achieved out of that project, were estimated to come in at about 40%. They are significantly better than what we had anticipated already. So again, it is a very reliable, renewable energy source. And so Ireland. I'm not going to spend too long on it because everyone has already mentioned it quite how much there is a huge potential here. And I could easily put up maps and show you how amazing our coast is. We all know we've had to deal with umbrellas going inside out many a time. There is amazing wind here. There is an amazing coastline. There are 2030 targets that need to be met. And when you consider these type of projects, they take 5, 7, 10 years to develop. So our 2030 targets for renewables are today, and we need to be making our decisions on what we want to do for 2030 today, because 2030 is only 12 years away and will come around very quickly. The west coast of Ireland, floating offshore wind is a great potential on the west coast of Ireland, given that there's the shelf drops pretty quickly, it's got deep waters. It also will enable us to bring an industry to the west coast of Ireland that's going to require supply chain, is going to create jobs in along the west coast. And so there's a huge potential for Ireland to consider how it could go and use the likes of floating solutions for that. And we also have to remember our energy mix at the moment. We import an awful lot, and a lot of our conventional resources are going to start depleting in the future. And we need to think about how they can be replaced today and make sure that we get those solutions in place. And as I always say, we're known as the Emerald Isle. This is our opportunity to truly become a green country.